I'm going to start off with an article that was published on the Jerusalem Post talking about the latest meeting, an urgent meeting that the Israeli defense minister had with his cabinet, talking about a threat coming from Turkey. Now, in the past couple of days, there have been several moves inside of Israel when it comes to Turkey. Firstly, a committee that advises the government said that Israel must prepare for an all-out war with Turkey. They mentioned the growing threat coming from Turkey, especially when it comes to Syria, the influence that Turkey has, the previous connections that they had with organizations and current relationships they have with organizations that are hostile to Israel, including the statements coming from the Turkish leadership in the past 15 months concerning Israel that at one point reached a threat to invade Israel. So after this committee that happened yesterday and we spoke about, they advised Israel to say, well, look, I think we need to prepare for a war with them and we need to assess the level of threat coming from Turkey. And now, one day after, Israel Katz, the Israeli defense minister, he has a meeting to talk about Turkey. And again, he's reiterating certain things in this meeting that were mentioned in this panel that was commissioned to the Israeli government, talking about the threat coming from Turkey. So the Israeli approach now when it comes to Turkey is that, okay, they've made some hostile statements against us previously. Israel used to criticize them a lot for welcoming, for example, the Palestinian resistance there, Hamas members, at one point blaming Turkey for participating with the armed wing of Hamas when they had Saleh al-Aruri operating in Turkey. He later went to Lebanon and then was assassinated by Israel. He was a known figure that led the resistance in the West Bank and the coordination between Iran and the West Bank, alongside statements, of course, coming from the Turkish leadership justifying the resistance, legitimizing it, and calling Benjamin Netanyahu Hitler and Israel a state of terror. And the latest move that happened a couple of months ago that also Israel spoke about was the call from Turkey to unite all Muslim nations to take action against Israel, because according to them, no one nation can just take an action on its own. We need to have coordinated action against them. So this is signaling that there is a growing concern coming from Israel at the top level from Turkey and its presence in Syria, its greater influence in the region, and the fact that at one point you could be talking about border threats between Israel and Turkey. This was the first thing that I wanted to talk to you about. The second thing that I wanted to talk to you about, there's a lot of talk about an advanced phase in the negotiations. It talks about the delegations going to Doha again, delegations going to Cairo, talks about from Antony Blinken saying that we're very close to reach a ceasefire. It's just a matter of time. And more criticism coming from those in Israel who oppose the ceasefire. Why do they oppose the ceasefire? Well, some people in Israel, they oppose the ceasefire because according to them, we haven't really achieved what we wanted in Israel when it comes to Hamas, when it comes to the Palestinian resistance, when it comes to withdrawing. There's more talks about how can we withdraw from Gaza, talks about Israel wanting 1 kilometer of a buffer zone inside of Gazan territory, something that the Palestinian resistance led by Hamas refuses outright. But now more reports are coming from Israel that there's a full censorship over the details of the ceasefire. Why? Because according to them, anything that will be revealed at this moment now could hinder the prospect of reaching a ceasefire, and we need to have full confidentiality when it comes to the ceasefire. In the meantime, some of the family members of the Israeli prisoners of war inside of Gaza, they met with Gal Hirsch. Gal Hirsch is the government representative that is primarily talking with the families of the Israeli prisoners of war. And he told them something very interesting. He said that we are working on an all-out deal. This is the first time that Israel is confirming that they're working on an all-out deal. So far, we understood the talk of phases when it comes to the ceasefire. Initial reports that Benjamin Netanyahu was only interested in the phase one of the ceasefire. That's why he wanted to get more in the initial phase rather than delay the release of following Israeli prisoners of war to a later stage. But now they're talking, well, this guy, Gal Hirsch, he's saying that, no, the talk is about releasing everyone, even if it means we need to have it in phases, even if that means we need to have it in phases. And also, according to him, they are keeping the assets to the final moment. We are keeping the Hamas assets to the final moment. What does he mean by the Hamas assets? He means the biggest prisoners that belong to the Palestinian resistance, figures that belong to other Palestinian movements, senior leaders like Marwan Barghouthi, Ahmad Saadat, and a man who was a leading figure in the armed wing of Hamas called Abdullah al-Barghouthi, all of whom Hamas are insisting need to be released this time. They wanted to release them before in the ceasefire deal and the prisoner deal that they had with Gilad Shalit back in 2011 approximately, when the Israelis released over 1,040 Palestinian prisoners in return for one Israeli soldier. So, according to that report, clearly it's Israel as well trying to hold the heaviest prisoners to the last moment. But of course, that's also coming from Hamas. The Palestinian resistance is not going to release all of the Israeli prisoners all at once unless Israel would be interested in an all-out deal where they would release all of the Palestinian prisoners too. And that's something that Hamas had on the table from day one, and that the Israeli side rejected also from day one. Don't forget, after the operation of Al-Aqsa flood, Hamas told them we're willing to stop the operation now if we can have a just prisoner exchange. They've been negotiating or trying to negotiate with Israel for 9 years in 2023, since 2014, for the release of Palestinian prisoners, because they had 4 Israelis in Gaza, some of whom were soldiers too, in active combat. But Israel constantly ignored that. So from Hamas's perspective, they had to take action to release their prisoners inside of Israel. So they are not giving Israel now even any names of those who would be released in the first knock, because according to the Palestinian resistance, they can't give any info so long as Israel is active in its war. If the Israelis want Hamas to give them more information, they need to stop the war. They need to stop the war. They need to withdraw so they can have freedom of movement and trust that no Israeli presence will be there in Gaza. Then they can give them information. But that's something, of course, that Benjamin Netanyahu would not be agreeing to. Therefore, this final phase, apparently, from these reports is very sensitive, and a lot of censorship is coming from Israel in relation to it, which leads me to the second topic that's also related. A former Major General in Israel, he said that the chief of staff should announce that the continuation of the war is illegal. This man was a Northern Command Major General in Israel, senior figure in the Israeli military, now saying that, well, basically the IDF in its entirety must refuse orders. That's something unprecedented in Israel. So many things that are happening and have been happening in the past 15 months are unprecedented, and this is one of them. A call from someone in such a high figure in the Israeli army calling the whole army in its entirety to basically refuse continuing the war. And the way he's saying that is by saying it's illegal. Why is he saying it's illegal? Because according to him, the deal that they have now almost agreed upon with Hamas is better than what they wanted. He's saying that, well, we wanted less than that before. We've had negotiations. more talks happen, and now we have more than what we wanted. So why are we still fighting this war? This should be made illegal. We should take the offer on the table now. And if not, then we should declare this war completely illegal. Completely illegal, that means the army must refuse orders of the political system, of the political leaders, of primarily Benjamin Netanyahu, because the talks in Israel are, well, it's only Benjamin Netanyahu who is benefiting from this war. No one else is benefiting from this war apart from him. We could have had a deal a year ago, and it was him who refused to continue. Even in the days of the temporary ceasefire, there was a clause to continue implementing the temporary ceasefire with the gradual release of further prisoners and a gradual withdrawal of the Israeli occupation forces from Gaza. However, it was the defense minister at the time, Yoav Gallant, who's also wanted for the ICC, a wanted war criminal alongside Netanyahu. He signed a declaration saying that we need to restart the war. That was an order. And then Israel started the war again, and all of the Israeli public now, at least those who are concerned with the lives of the Israeli prisoners of war in Gaza, saying the blood is on the hands of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He is the one who is killing these people, and he doesn't even care about them. And as a matter of fact, there were statements coming from figures like Smotrich saying, we can't guarantee that these people come back alive anyway, We can assure you that we will get their bodies back, but them being alive, not so sure. Again, shows you the big difference in split coming inside of Israel in relation to the ceasefire and the way Israel is and the shape of the country and everything to do with that as well. Then we've had more attacks coming from most likely Yemen. They haven't declared that it was them. Yemen did not declare that they conducted an attack on Israel, but Israel said that just this evening the Air Force intercepted 3 unmanned aerial vehicles launched from the east. Launched from the east, there are 2 options. Number 1, Yemen. Number 2, the Iraqi resistance. Number 3, even though that's very unlikely, Iran. However, Iran is still pending with a True Promise 3 that, should be significant, not something like drones. But it's most likely coming from Yemen. Yemen might declare that they carried out this operation. However, the option that this could be coming from Iraq is very likely. Why? Because Yemen, Ansarullah in particular, they use the southern and western parts of the occupied territories to conduct their attacks. They usually launch their drones over the Red Sea. Sometimes they go over Egyptian territories. So if they launch them from the Red Sea and they continue, they will attack parts in South Israel. That's if that's the place they're targeting. Secondly, if they want to target places in central Israel, they would go over Egypt most likely and go from the western coast, from the Mediterranean coast, onto the target. So the fact that this is coming from the east could indicate that this was an Iraqi move, because most of the Iraqi resistance, they target Israel from the east. However, the Iraqi resistance said that they temporarily stopped the operations when it comes to Israel. That's it would be a breach of that if that was them. And again, we don't have any confirmation that it's from Yemen yet. So that makes it a mysterious attack so far on Israel. However, what's for sure is that attacks are still happening. East, west, south, and Israel is saying that they intercepted it now. And the final thing that I wanted to talk to you about is Lebanon finally has a new president. Lebanon has had a vacuum when it comes to a president for the past 2 years. Lots of talks, lots of politics, lots of differences, lots of pressure, lots of international pressure, but now they finally have a new president. Who is that president? What led to the presidency? How did they finally agree? And how would that affect the Lebanese resistance? Well, the man is called Joseph Aoun. Joseph Aoun is the 4th commander of the Lebanese army. He had a rich history in the Lebanese army, and he put himself forward to become the president. There was a last-minute withdrawal from figures in the presidential race, which means that there might have been some sort of an agreement. However, he only became president in the second round of voting. In the first round of voting, there was a refusal. There was a refusal from who? From Hezbollah and the Amal movement. The Amal movement is the original resistance movement inside of Lebanon that many of the Hezbollah leaders were participating in the beginning before the launch of Hezbollah. Amal stands for Afwaj al-Muqawama al-Lebaniyya, the waves of the Lebanese resistance. So both of them, and they're both armed groups in Lebanon, they decided to boycott the voting. Why did they boycott the voting? That was most likely due to certain disagreements that they had with Joseph Aoun, potentially. Why? Because later on they agreed and they voted for him. It was a pressure move coming from Hezbollah and Amal, the main resistance movements inside of Lebanon, to hint that no, we won't agree on having a president unless we have our interests met in Lebanon. So will their interests be met in Lebanon? That's something that we can understand a little bit further when it comes to the statements that came from Joseph Aoun. He pointed out that we will invest in the army to control and secure the borders in the south and demarcate them in the east and north, fight terrorism, implement international resolutions, and prevent Israeli attacks on Lebanon, stressing the importance of activating the work of the security forces as a basic tool for maintaining security and enforcing the laws. He also said, we will discuss the comprehensive defense strategy at the diplomatic, economic, and military levels that will enable the Lebanese state to remove the Israeli occupation and deter its aggression. And he also pledged to work to affirm the state's right to monopolize the carrying of weapons. This is something that I will get back to in a second because it's very important, especially when it comes to Hezbollah. I said also, if we want to build a country, we must all be under the rule of law, saying that he refused to interfere in the judiciary, pointing that there will be no immunity for war criminals or corrupt people. So the man is saying that basically he wants to have more power when it comes to the army, unite more groups under the army, deter the Israeli aggression. Again, Israel was mentioned multiple times in his speech, signaling that he is actually considering Israel to be a threat and potentially having a review, and clearly stating that we're reviewing the strategy of the Lebanese army. These things are very significant. And again, the state's right to monopolize the carrying of weapons. These are two of the main things that he mentioned here. So the first one is reviewing the strategy of the army as a whole when it comes to defense, when it comes to deterring Israel, protecting Lebanon, economy, everything to do with that. And then the right to monopolize the carrying of weapons. This is a very important issue here. The weapons of Hezbollah in Lebanon have been a subject that people have spoken about in Lebanon for a very long time. Of course, from Hezbollah's perspective, this weapon is there to protect Lebanon, to defend Lebanon. We liberated the south of Lebanon with this weapon, and we have a hostile entity next to us that engaged in war, in massive crimes against Lebanon from 1948, by the way, not just from 1982 from 1948, they've been attacking Lebanon. And there are voices in Israel that want parts of Lebanon. So from Hezbollah's perspective, this weapon is a requirement. We're not using our weapons here to bully or intimidate or threaten anyone internally, but against the Israeli enemy. However, not many people bought that in Lebanon. But Hezbollah mentioned something from a very long time ago. They said, so long as we have an army, if we have an army in Lebanon, that is a strong army, that is an army that can defend our country. We're willing to merge in this army, but they haven't seen anything that would put the army in such a category. Firstly, the Lebanese army is exposed completely, and it's totally unequipped. At the end of the day, it's more cost effective for Lebanon to have a resistance movement in the form of Hezbollah with their weapons than buying fighter jets, for example, when they hardly have any economic stability internally. However, the statement that came from the new Lebanese president about reviewing and revisiting the strategy of the Lebanese army in a comprehensive manner, this could indicate that there might be a new phase. However, this new phase will be very slow. This is not something that will happen immediately, and then Hezbollah will tell them, "Oh well, go ahead, you can have our weapons." Hezbollah will never do that. And the strongest deterrence when it comes to Lebanon is, well, the Lebanese resistance. They are the ones with the strategic weapons that are able to threaten Israel, not the Lebanese army with okay, they have approximately 80 to 90,000 soldiers. That's number one. Number two, hardly equipped with anything apart from tools and equipment to have internal policing, not for something to deter an Israeli aggression. They don't have any air defense systems. They don't have anything that is strategic enough to a level to attack Israel. That is the biggest threat against Lebanon. So will that review have something for the next, for example, 5 to 10 years, where they will say, look, we will be at a stage where we are indeed a strong national Lebanese army able to deter any Israeli aggression. And now it's the time for Hezbollah to hand in their weapons. Maybe, perhaps that could happen at one point, but they would need to satisfy the Lebanese resistance to a very large extent, because Hezbollah as a resistance, as an armed movement that is outside of the state technically, or a state authority or control, they have arms more than many countries do. Hezbollah is the biggest armed group in the world. They intimidate Israel. They have weapons that can reach in any part of the occupied territories. And the late Secretary General even said that we can cover the whole Mediterranean if we want to, not only with land-to-land missiles, but with land-to-sea missiles as well. So that's something that would have to take a lot of time. And the talks when it comes to the resistance and the strategy of Lebanon moving forward, especially confronting Israel, could have been potentially something that they spoke about with Hezbollah, and that led Hezbollah and the Amal movement to delay the vote. And they had to kind of have a review with them, perhaps, or with him personally, to give them reassurances about their weapons and their presence, especially in the south, and talk about the strategy for the future. And after the vote, so it wasn't only before after the vote, Joseph Aoun, who is the president now, he had an extensive meeting with Hezbollah and with the Amal movement. Nothing was published about that meeting whatsoever. No details have been published so far. If they do, of course, we will cover them as and when they do. But that also indicates that the coordination hasn't just happened before to get the vote and get the man in, but the coordination will be ongoing to make sure that they agree on a strategy and a vision for the future. Because now the Lebanese army is present in the south. However, Israel is also present in the south. Israel has just over 2 weeks to completely withdraw. If they don't, that will put them at odds with everyone in Lebanon, including the Lebanese army. And there have been more hostile tones coming from the Lebanese army against Israel. Even Hezbollah said it shouldn't only be us bearing the brunt of the Israeli aggression against Lebanon, it also should be an arm. So the whole thing is indicating that there would be certain talks about the future of Lebanon, of course, alongside its defense and its military and the resistance, everything to do with the Lebanon's economy, its social and political matters as well, because the president also said we need to reform Lebanon to become a full democracy, because Lebanon's democracy now is also, nothing ideal. All of that will also take a lot of time, but the fact of the matter is there is a high level of coordination between the new president and the Lebanese resistance.